Hello, I'm going to talk through a model answer for the Blood Brothers uh, exam. So this is a question that covers essentially the importance of education and the character of Mickey, okay, and how those two kind of tie together. So my opening, as you can see, I'm just going to highlight a few key bits. So through the character of Mickey, Willie Russell aims to highlight the plight and suffering of those who experience a poor education. Writing at a time of great economic and social divide, Russell explores an inherent injustice at the core of British society. The quality of life you experience is often based upon the school that you go to. Mickey is therefore used as a symbol of a failure within society and acts as a warning to audiences. So this is my introduction. And what am I doing here? Well, firstly, I'm acknowledging that Mickey is a creation. He's a character. Okay, he's not a real person. And I've acknowledged that here there is an author who has created Mickey for a purpose. What is the purpose? Well, it's here to highlight the plight of those who experience a poor education. This links back nicely to the question. Okay, always link it back to the question. Again, I get a little bit more of the writer in there exposes, and here I'm talking, I guess, about the message, the writer's message. An inherent injustice at the core of British society. This starts to bring in a little bit of that context, that the quality of life you experience is often based upon the school that you go to. Okay, that's my kind of central argument for this question. Mickey is therefore used as a symbol. You can see that kind of subject specific vocabulary, the kind of words you would only use really in an English essay as a symbol of a failure within society and acts as a warning to audiences. And here I acknowledge, the kind of the third part of the puzzle. If the first part is the text, the second part is the author, or the third part is the audience. You need those three things in order to achieve success with respect to literature. So that's my introduction. Okay, really nicely linked to the question, introducing a few ideas, not going into too much detail, but giving a nice overview. Now, I've chosen for this question because we're focusing on character, really, and it's kind of character linked to theme. But because it's character, I'm going to focus on a chronological reading of the play. Again, I'll go through. What do I have? Well, from the start of the play, it is clear that the majority of Mickey's education occurs in the street. I'll come back to that. Quite often, when we see his character, he is outdoors, being left to his own devices, a condition of the fact that his mother, Mrs. Johnson, has to work to support the family. I'm giving a nice overview of the play and my understanding of it. Therefore, lacking the ability to stay home and monitor Mickey. When we first meet Mickey, he is playing in the street with Edward. We note his dialect, representative of his working class upbringing in the way he speaks. Did they call you Eddie? In contrast, Edward is far more well spoken, responding with no, suggesting he is surprised having never heard anyone refer to him this way at home. Later, we see Mickey involved in a violent game with Sammy, who shoots, I got you, I shot you, I bloody well know I did. The exposure to this sort of violence, even in play form, is an example of the kind of education that Mickey receives. It is left to his brother, who has a propensity towards violence, to raise the brother. This also acts as a clear example of foreshadowing, as later in the play Sammy will draw Mickey into the violent world of criminality that will ultimately lead to his death by gunfire. I'm bringing in a little bit of the later, drawing the beginning to the end. In many ways, Russell is showing the importance, albeit negative, of education away from the classroom. We can learn much about what we eventually consider okay in our day-to-day lives, and parents must be careful about the influences that their children encounter. A modern audience may see the relevance of this with respect to the impact of social media and the exposure young people have to a variety of influences, not all positive. Okay, so here is a kind of marker that to my examiner that I'm focusing on the start, okay? The start of the play, from the start of the play. Here I twist a little bit of the question to my own ends. Education. Well, what is education? It's very broad. Most people, when they think of education, they think of school. But we're educated in a variety of ways. We're educated at home. We're educated in a street. We're educated by our friends. We're educated by our society. Of course, the most obvious place that we're educated is school. But here I'm just doing something clever with my interpretation of the question. Later on, I'm just giving a kind of overview. You'll note that because this paper is closed book and it doesn't give you an extract, my quotes are much, much smaller. Sometimes I'm just using references. I still have, for example, sort of a few examples of writers' methods. I'm linking to AO3 here. I'm dropping in little quotes where they need to be. And I'm linking back to the question. Again, a little bit of that subject-specific terminology and broader links to the play. Okay. Here, what I do at the end is I bring it towards the context of reception. Okay. Because I bring it into the modern day. I try to show my examiner how it still has relevance in our time period. Again, I open with a marker as the play progresses. We get a window into the school experiences of Mickey and the impact that this can have on a person's life chances. Mickey attends a local secondary modern school. Noted in the stage directions as all boredom and futility, suggesting a sense of the useless is wrapped up in this establishment. The teacher that appears is drawling on, barely teaching, discussing the Burro Indian of the Amazon basin, and constantly being interrupted, the lesson eventually descending into farce while the teacher tells a student to shut up and calls him a turd. Eventually, both Mickey and Ledward are removed from class. This scene exposes the core quality of education that Mickey receives working as a working class student in inner city Liverpool. The low expectation from the teachers are clear, maintaining that Mickey won't get a job, a sad foreshadowing, again bringing in those later connections of Mickey's later struggles with unemployment. This sits in stark contrast to Edward, who is spoken to by his teachers about Oxbridge, showing the high expectations at his school. Edward is also suspended for speaking back to his teacher. However, the long-term effects are starkly different. Edward eventually makes his way to university, protected by his class, and Mickey leaves school to struggle to maintain employment and ultimately experiences issues with self-esteem. Again, Russell, bringing the author in, uses juxtaposition between Mickey and Edward to highlight the way the working classes are punished far harder for indiscretions in the school, still linking it back to education than their higher class peers. So again, this is another example of a marker. We're moving through the play. We've got lots of small quotes here and also showing our understanding of form. This is a play. The poor quality of education that Mickey receives, once again, a little bit of AO3. This sits in stark contrast. Again, we're using that idea of juxtapositions. And then we tie it all up at the end with the author. Then this is my ending. These tensions around education and class build to a crescendo towards the end of the play, where we see the final example of the importance of education. So I'm showing my examiner that we're now at the end. Yeah, we're now at the end of the play. At Christmas time, Mickey and Edward are reunited, having returned from university, the former having just lost his job. Okay, there in itself is a little bit of a juxtaposition, right, in my analysis. As they speak, the distance in their circumstances becomes clear. Edward is jubilant, remarking that university is fantastic, and so that he's been to so many parties and meeting so many tremendous people. You'll notice my nicely embedded quotations here. Mickey's curt response, good, exposes his resentment and jealousy as he struggles with the reality of the world. He feels there is very little to celebrate. And he feels there is very little to celebrate as he's been walking around all day looking for a job. I mean, that's obviously a clear example of his struggles, right? Again, we see the long-term effects of the poor, education, the opportunities you have are far smaller. There is more of a sense of struggle, and even something as simple as happiness appears unobtainable. So that's my kind of interpretation here, isn't it? When Edward says that if he couldn't get a job, I'd sod it and draw the doll, we see the inherent privilege of those with wealth and power, that they can masquerade as poor with the safety net of knowing that they will always be a comfort they can return to. Mickey summarizes the distance perfectly when he says, because while no one was looking, I grew up. Okay, and that's me kind of using the quote here to summarize too. The use of no one here implies a real sense of isolation, a sad reminder that often those people like Mickey are forgotten. Russell keenly exposes the opportunities that education provides. They are more than just a piece of paper you can show off. Education has reverberations through a person's life long after they've left school. Now, I don't tend to include a conclusion because I do feel that I've kind of done the conclusion here, right? But ultimately, that's a nice little understanding of the introduction and 3-paragraph essay.